Yeah. Would anyone object to if the organizers, participants took a photo of the audience? Encourage it. Okay, good. Thank you. We'll begin in just a moment. You're here. We're recording and we're good to go. Wonderful. Okay, then we will begin right now. Can I invite our panelists to come to the front? As they arrive, let me just introduce myself, and then I'll introduce the panel. My name is David Simon. Stay on camera here. I'm with the Macmillan Center. I'm a senior lecturer in the Jackson School for Public Affairs. I'm also the assistant dean for graduate education there. And with the Macmillan Center, I direct the Genocide Studies program. We are lucky to have with us for today's panel, really obviously an expert panel is only we can only have on the breaches of international law in the aggression against Ukraine women in Russian captivity. As is customary for genocide studies events, but also many Macmillan events, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Yale University and the Macmillan Center acknowledge that Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking peoples, have stewarded through generations the land and waterways that is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. This event is co-sponsored by the Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies program at the Macmillan Center, as well as this program on peace and development. In addition to our panelists, who I'll name shortly, I'd like especially to thank Hira Joffrey for her help in organizing this event, and Irina Solomko-Bonenberger, who conceived of the idea and brought it to us. We're really grateful for making that happen. We are now rapidly approaching 1 year since the start of the current phase of hostilities in Ukraine, bringing with that a round of introspection, awareness raising, and other such analyses. So Russia originally invaded Ukraine 8 years prior to that. There's much we can learn about the current situation from examining it in a broader perspective. And so for that, we are lucky to have with us a panel featuring Lyudmila Husinova, my apologies as I stumble with some of Ukrainian pronunciations, Anna Olsen, and Tetiana Katrychenko. I will let Tetiana introduce the other two panelists, but if I may take the liberty of introducing you, Tetiana, to the audience. Tetiana Katrychenko is a journalist and the coordinator of the Ukrainian NGO, the Media Initiative for Human Rights. She's the author of the 2019 report, Prisoners of War and Civilian Hostages of Donbas. Since the beginning of the armed conflict, her focus has been on covering the topic of illegally detained persons in Eastern Ukraine. She later shifted from journalism work to conducting advocacy campaigns in support of detainees' families, and subsequently joined the Media Initiative for Human Rights team. Since February 2020, Katrychenko has been a member of the commission launched by the Ukrainian Ministry of Reintegration of Temporary Occupied Territories in Ukraine, which deals with issues related to the recognition of persons of liberty, deprived of liberty, as a result of the armed aggression against Ukraine. And I'll take this moment also to welcome and thank our simultaneous translator. Okay, I think without further ado, and with repeated thanks for your presence here, I'd like to turn it over to Tetiana to introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much. I am Tetiana Katrychenko. I am a coordinator of human rights organization, non-government organization. It's called Media Initiative for Human Rights. I apologize for my English, but I try to speak. Thank you. We prepared this report about family prisoners and prisoners of war, and I can explain what we analyzed. During my detention, it did not matter at all that I was a woman. They don't care about things such as age and gender. Olga Politova told me a few years ago. She is a doctor who worked in Donetsk. A year after the beginning of the occupation, in 2014, was detained in Donetsk region. She was detained on suspicion of spying for Ukraine and organizing resistance. In fact, on refusing to put up with Russian occupation in Ukrainian territory. Dr. Politova spent 2 years in basement and prisoners in occupied Donetsk without the protection of lawyers and any possibility to access justice. She was released by the Ukrainian government along with the civilian and military personnel during a major exchange in December 2016. For a long time, while Olga was held in captivity, she was beaten and tortured with electric current. And this is despite her age. Olga was 65 years old at this moment. I am recalling this story for a reason. I want to show that the practice of detaining civilians in the occupied territories did not begin on the 24th of February 2022, but 8 years before that. Since 2014, we have talked about thousands of Ukrainians detained for political reasons. In particular, dozens of women. Because they did not agree to collaborate with Russia and its proxy. They helped wounded soldiers who got captured. After the 24th of February 2022, the number of detained women increased. First, we can talk about women in the military. There are currently 41,000 of them serving in the Ukraine army. According to rough estimates, about 500 were captured. Second, we are talking about civilians. It is difficult to tell the number of detainees. In the occupied territory in Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, or Zaporizhia regions, detention can take place as I am talking to you now. Even the government of Ukraine does not have accurate data of civilians detained in connection with Russia aggression. The reason is that same people do not have the opportunity to report their detention or afraid of persecution of their families. But we can talk about a few hundred. We estimate that 161 women were released over 12 months since the invasion. 2 of them are here with us, Anna Olsen and Lyudmila Gevseinova. One is military and other civilian. Both the military and civilians ended up in the same basement in the occupied territory and in the territory of the Russian Federation. There are several common reasons for detention. First, by accident, while just walking down the street. Second, for check, so-called filtering. Third, due to an active position, opposition to the occupation and communication in Ukraine. I will allow myself to digress and recall the story of Lyudmila Nikitenko from the south of Ukraine, Zaporizhia region. The south is a partially Russian-speaking region in Ukraine. It used to be Russian-speaking. Moreover, after the invasion, more and more people are abandoning the Russian language. Lyudmila Nikitenko lived under the occupation, but often talked her daughter on the phone. She told that was going on and how Russian soldiers were behaving. She was detained for this, and she got beaten because she spoke Ukrainian. She told, I am Ukrainian speaking. To answer in Russian, I need time to think. And when I took time to think, I was hit on the hair and ears. Fourth reasons for detention was to induce cooperation, or often we and the fourth reasons on the battlefield. Yes, we understand that it is not a crime to detain a serviceman during the war. The enemy has the right to do so. However, they have no right to deprive of the right to life, keep inductive or torture. Prisoners of war enjoy a special status provided by Geneva Convention. They may not to be subjected to physical forces or tortures, and must be treated humanely. Women should be treated with all respect due to their gender. But Russian military ignore those provisions. Olga, a military woman who was released from captivity, recalled, I was told to take off my shoes. I took off my shoes. He, a Russian soldier, took off my socks. He put my feet in a bowl of water and standing to run the electric current. I asked them not to do that. The enemy cannot detain civilians at all if they don't violate the rule established in the occupation. And if they violate it, they have the right to a fair trial and protection. However, according to our surveys, the Russians detain people without explanation or reasonable cause. They separate women from their families, from their children. Some women still cannot take their children out the occupation territories. Some of the detained women are being held in the occupied territories. Some of them, both military and civilians, are transported to Russia. Until the 24th of February, such cases were rare. Currently, several hundred women are being held in pre-trial detention centers in Taganrog, Belgorod, Bryansk, and others. What is important is that Russia hates many people without information Ukraine about the place of detention. It is difficult to say that it's happening in those pre-trial detention centers. Russia does not allow representatives of international organizations to visit the detainees. Even representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross don't have access to prisons. But in fact, they are not persistent enough to get there. What is why it is so important, I'm sorry, what is why it is so important that international partners put pressure on the Russian Federation to provide access to the detainees, in particular to check the condition of detainees and provide medical care. It is also important that Russia ensures the right to the correspondence with relatives. What is why we are here, and what is why we are raising this issue. It is important to make sure the voices of victims are here. Ukraine Ukraine needs attention to this the issue of detaining civilians, in particular women, as well as compliance with proper condition of detention of prisoners of war. Alternatively, a special mechanism for the release of civilians should be developed, or a special humanitarian platform should be organized for the release activity. And special attention should be paid to women in captivity and family hostages. Thank you. And if you have questions, I will repeat. Yes. Yes, thank you. Yes.
If there are questions at this moment for Tetiana?
I have a question. You work for a human rights organization. Now, on Saturday, I'm sure you're aware, Vice President Kamala Harris declared Russia to be in violation of human rights. And this has legal standing in the United States. There's going to be some follow-up action. I'm not exactly sure of the specifics, but this is the beginning of a process which is going to take place just based on that formal declaration. So my question to you, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, is there a possibility for you or groups like you to work with the United States government, because we know that, neither Russia nor the US are members of the World Court, the International Criminal Court. So certainly that's not a vehicle that is going to be recognized. In fact, maybe with Russia, no vehicle is going to be recognized. But is there a possibility for some communication and some cooperation with this now new procedure that's going to start based on this declaration, a violation of human rights? And if you're interested in that, we might be able to expedite that kind of communication. We have contacts with the administration, with Congress, people that could help establish this channel of cooperation and communication.
Так, прошу допомоги. Пане Вікторе, так нам дуже, ми розуміємо, що має бути для України винайдений спеціальний механізм, який би дозволив досягти справедливості для усіх потерпілих.
We understand, we're aware that special mechanisms should be set up for Ukraine that would enable us to attain justice for all those who suffered.
І ми розуміємо, що Міжнародний кримінальний суд, про який ви згадали, не може бути наразі єдиним виходом для того, щоб досягти цієї мети.
And we are aware that International Criminal Court, as you mentioned, cannot be the only or the single available solution to resolve the situation that you mentioned.
Але водночас ми розуміємо, що цей механізм має бути легалізований, тобто прийнятий більшістю цивілізованого світу для того, щоб таке покарання могло вступити в дію.
But we're also aware and understand that this mechanism should be should be legalized and accepted by many countries around the world so that that mechanism could have an impact and effect.
Тому справді ми дуже будемо вдячні за такі контакти, таку підтримку, тому що для України можливо не тільки міжнародний рівень, а також ми маємо користуватися національним рівнем. І якщо ми будемо говорити про таку колаборацію між міжнародним і національним рівнем, то тоді ми сподіваємось досягти цієї мети правосуддя для кожного.
And therefore we'd be grateful, of course, for the contacts and support in this domain, in this matter, because for us, in addition to the international support and cooperation in this field, it's important for Ukraine to have this internal domestic support and work. So if we can see that in addition to that, we have the international support, then it will allow us to move forward and have a comprehensive approach to addressing all and resolving all these issues.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think now we'll move on to our next two panelists, starting with Lyudmila Huseynova, sorry. Lyudmila Huseynova, who is a resident of the temporarily occupied
Новоазовськ.
Thank you. Region of Donetsk, where she worked as a safety engineer at a local poultry farm. At the time of her arrest, she had spent 5 years caring for orphans and semi-orphans from the temporary occupied village of Primorsk. She was detained on October 9th, 2019 for volunteering for espousing a pro-Ukrainian position. A blue and yellow flag hung over her house in Novoazovsk. I cannot say that word.
Novoazovsk.
For a long time. And for her social media activity. Lyudmila was initially detained in the Ilyich prison, where she was severely tortured. She was later transferred to a pretrial detention center in Donetsk and charged with espionage. During the 3 years of her imprisonment, the local courts never delivered any kind of sentence. Lyudmila, I'll turn it to you to say.
Thank you.
Я приїхала сюди до вас не для того, щоб ви мене жаліли.
I didn't really come here for you to pity me here.
Я приїхала для того, щоб розповісти, як там жінкам переживати все це, І для того, щоб ви знали, що жінки переживають там, і для того, щоб ви знали, скільки жінок всю хвилину зараз, поки ми з вами сидимо в безпеці, але вони катуються, вони не знають, що через хвилину з ними відбудеться.
And I came here to tell you what is happening to women out there, what they have to live through and live with, how many women are there and how they are being treated there, how they've been tortured, and they don't know from one moment to another what is going to happen to their life.
Мені дійсно важко зараз, ще дуже мало часу пройшло з періоду, коли я в неволі, я не досі вірю в це, мені важко про це якісь спогади мати, але я з вами іми поділюсь, бо я вірю в те, що ваша допомога, ваша підтримка і ваш вплив на ваших посадовців прискорить звільнення наших жінок, прискорить звільнення нашої країни, і в нас буде мир, і сім'ї, котрі зараз роз'єднані, вони будуть разом. Мами будуть разом зі своїми дітьми.
It's still hard for me to recall what happened to me because it's been so fresh and recent, but I will do my best to share my recollections of what happened to me. I will do that. I'll share that with you. Perhaps owing to that, you'll be able to enhance and intensify your support for us, your help, your impact, your influence over those who are decision makers. That would help us to speed up the liberation of those women who are held captives there. That would speed up peace that we so much crave. That would speed up the reunification of families, mothers with their children.
Мене дійсно затримали за те, що я допомагала дітям, котрі проживали на окупованій території.
I really was detained for helping children who resided on occupied territories.
І моя провина була в тому, що я тим дітям привозила не тільки одяг, котрий збирали мої друзі, мої рідні на вільній території України, але вони писали їм листівки, писали листівки українською мовою. Але вони також передавали книжки, дитячі книжки, котрі були видані українською мовою.
And what they accused me of, that my fault was not only just because I was bringing clothes to these children, the clothes that were collected by my friends, by my relatives, but also because I was bringing postcards and notes to them in Ukrainian. And the books that I brought to them were also in Ukrainian. So they actually held it against me as my fault, as blaming me for that.
Я дуже хотіла, щоб діти, котрі проживали на окупованій території, котрим пропаганда, вчителі, будь-хто, інші дорослі вбивали в голову, що за лінією розмежування Україна проти них, що Україна мусить їх вбити або щось скоїти з ними погане. Я дуже хотіла донести дітям, що про них пам'ятають, що про них мають опіку, іми опікуються, їх люблять. І діти це відчули, і я знаю, що ця любов, вона залишилась в цих дітях і по сей день.
What I wanted was to have to make sure that these children living on the occupied territories could actually understand the reality of what was happening, to prevent those who were trying to brainwash them, be teachers, anyone else, from into believing that Ukraine is going to hurt them. I wanted these children to remember that Ukraine remembers about them, Ukraine cares about them, and Ukraine loves them. So what I wanted to do with my efforts is to make sure that they know all of that.
Мене забрали рано утром, коли я йшла на роботу. Вони на вулиці зупинили автівку, вирвали в мене з рук сумку, закинули в ту автівку і повезли до своєї контори.
I was detained. I was arrested. Then, in fact, they grabbed me off the street. I was on my way to work when a car stopped next to me. They approached me, grabbed my bag, and threw me into this car.
Вони не давали мені дати якийсь телефон, щоб я мала можливість попередити рідних або на роботі.
They didn't allow me to use my phone so I could call my relatives or I could call my work.
Вони просто шукали в моєму телефоні щось на відкритій мережі в Фейсбуці. Вона в мене була відкрита сторінка, але те, що моє фото було на фоні прапора українського, це їх дуже розлючило.
They were going through my phone and looking at my Facebook pages that were public, that were open, and of course they were going through that. But what they really got mad about was when they saw my picture with the background of the Ukrainian flag.
Вони мені нічого не поясняли, потім сказали, що буде обшук у мене вдома, і повезли туди, бо ключі від дому були в сумці, і вони цим уже володіли самі.
They didn't explain anything to me. They told me they were going to search my home, and since they grabbed my bag, they had the keys in it, so they had all full access to it, so we went there.
Вони шукали український флаг, вони шукали українські книжки, вони шукали, навіть самі не знали, що вони шукають.
But they were looking for a Ukrainian flag. They were looking for Ukrainian books. They didn't even know themselves what they were trying to look for.
З українських книжок вони знайшли 3 томи Тараса Шевченка.
They found 3 books of Taras Shevchenko, a Ukrainian Shakespeare from an interpretive explanation, if you like.
Вони знайшли історію запорізьких казаків українською мовою.
They found a book on the history of Zaporizhia Cossacks in Ukrainian.
Вони знайшли книжку екс-президента України Кучми «Україна не Росія».
They also managed to find a book written by former president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, Ukraine is not Russia, called Ukraine is not Russia.
Більш нічого, бо
There was nothing else.
дійсно в мене був і є український флаг. В мене був і є український флаг, котрий мені підписали українські солдати, котрі в той час боронили Маріуполь, бо я, як могла, допомагала і цим людям. І в мене є, і були, і є зараз там в Новоазовську книжки українською мовою, котрі мені підписували українські автори.
Indeed, I had a Ukrainian flag in my possession, and indeed it was, and I still have it. I had books, and I had this flag also signed by the Ukrainian soldiers who were defending Mariupol at that time, and I was helping them, trying to help them as much as I could. And I also had books in Novoazovsk, where I'm from, that were signed by the authors. Indeed, I had that.
І я дуже добре це спрятала вдома, і воно храниться там, зберігається там. І я вірю, що дуже скоро я зможу той флаг знову повісити на свою домівку, достати ті книжки, поставити їх на полиці, і вони будуть моєю гордістю і гордістю моїх рідних.
I made sure that both the flags and the books are well hidden. And I do hope that soon I'll be able to extract them from this hiding place, both the flag, put it up on the house or beside my house, and I would be able to put the books on the bookshelf and proudly enjoy them, and so that my relatives could proudly enjoy them too.
Але після обшуку мене знову посадили в автівку, мої руки закрили кайданками, на голову вдягли мішок і повезли, не пояснюючи, куди мене везуть.
What happened after the house search? They led me back into the car. They handcuffed me. They put a bag on my head, and they started driving somewhere where I had no idea where they bringing me to.
Я дуже надіялась в ті хвилини, я не вірила, що станеться так, як сталося. Я дуже надіялась, що зараз мене привезуть на лінію розмежування і просто скажуть, йди геть з цієї землі.
Actually, what I was hoping for, and I could not even imagine what was about to happen would take such a dramatic turn, but I was just hoping that they would bring me to the line of separation between the forces, and they would just let me out and say, go away.
Коли мене привезли в якийсь місто, я ще не знала, де я.
But instead, they brought me to some town. I didn't know where it was.
Вони з одної руки зняли кайданку, але інша була в кайданці, і мішок це був на голові.
They uncuffed me on one hand, and the handcuff on my other hand was still there, and the bag was still on my head.
Вони наказали мені роздягатися.
They ordered me to undress.
І це були голоси виключно чоловіків, там не було жінок.
They were all males. No female voice could be heard. They're all orders uttered by males.
Вони сміялися, торкалися мене.
They were laughing. They were touching me.
Потім наказали знову одягти на
Де-
себе
Then they ordered me to dress again,
і поволокли кудись коридором.
and they started hauling me basically along the corridor somewhere.
Я почула, як відкриваються двері.
I heard a door being opened.
Зняли з мене наручники, але мішок так і був на голові.
They removed the handcuffs, but the bag was still on my head,
І впихнули в камеру.
and they pushed me to the cell.
Потім двері закрилися, мені дозволили зняти. Була в камері жінка
They closed the door. They allowed me to remove this from my head.
і сказала, можна зняти.
There was a woman in the cell and said, you can now take it off.
І сказала, що це ізоляція.
And then she said, you're at the prison called isolation.
Я дуже налякалась, бо я читала вже про цю ізоляцію.
I was very frightened because I read a lot about this isolation prison.
Ця жінка мені сказала, тут щодобове відеоспостереження.
That woman informed me that this cell was, or this prisoner cell was monitored, CCTV monitored 24/7.
Що моя нара буде зверху, там було дві спарених нари і двоповерхових.
There were two double bunk beds, and she told me that my bunk bed would be up there.
Але не можна не сідати, не лягати на ту нару до 10-ї вечора.
But she also informed me that we were not allowed to either sit or lie down on that bunk bed until 10 p.m.
Там в куточку був унітаз, але він нічим не був загорожений.
There was a toilet corner there, but it was not used. It could not be used because it was kind of fenced off.
І вони спостерігали через камеру, що ти робиш.
And they could simply monitor what you would be doing in a restroom or a toilet through their video cameras observation.
Мене не було ніякого одягу, я не мала як переодягатися.
I had no any clothes. I couldn't even change it.
Не було ніяких засобів гігієни, нічого.
I had no hygiene means of hygiene. I had no hygiene products that I could use.
І дівчина, яка була в камері, вона дала мені якусь майку.
A girl who was in the same cell gave me some t-shirt.
Це була єдиний одяг, який я могла переодягатися.
And that was the only clothes that I had to change into.
Я декілька днів була в такому режимі, що 6 години ранку до 10 години вечора ти не можеш сісти, ти ходиш або стоїш.
And that was the mode I was in for a couple of days. From 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. you couldn't either sit down or lie down. You had to either stand or walk.
А з 10 години ночі до 6 ранку ти повинна бути на нарі на своїй зверху, і дуже через пів метра була лампа, вона 100-ваттна, вона дуже сліпила очі, але не можна було закрити очі ні рукою, ні ковдрою.
From 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. You were supposed to be on your bunk bed, but a powerful bulb, 100-watt bulb, was really almost next to me. It was so bright, and you couldn't really escape the light. Covering your eyes with your hand or something.
Я мала при кожному шороху, якщо там стукалась двері або відкривалася кормушка в двері, я мала одягати на себе пакет і відвертатися до стіни.
Every time there was a sound heard, a door opened or slammed, or somebody would open a window through which food was passed, I was supposed to put a bag on my head and turn away towards the wall.
Через декілька днів я не мала сил вже і дуже втомилася, у мене боліли ноги, боліла спина, і я за хвилин за 5 до відбою вирішила прилечь на свою нару.
Several days into that kind of state, I couldn't tolerate it anymore. My back was hurting me, my feet were hurting me. So I decided to get onto my bed a little bit earlier than the prescribed 10 p.m. time.
Я роздягалася під ковдрою, щоб не так було наглядно для них. Я зняла, що мала який верхній одяг, і залишилась в білизні, в тій майці.
What I was trying to do was I was trying to remove some of my clothes on me that under the cover of the blanket, so they wouldn't be obvious and seen by them. So I just left my underwear and my t-shirts on me.
Але двері відкрилися.
But then they opened the doors.
Я відразу одягла, сіла на ту нару і одягла пакет на голову.
I set up on the bunk bed, put the bag onto my head.
А на мене почали кричати,
And they started shouting at me, started cursing at me.
що я завчасно лягла на своє ліжко.
Telling me that it was too early for me to lie down on my bed.
І він збросив мене за ногу з другого того поверху.
So he pulled me by my foot and just threw me down from the second floor to the second level to the floor. It was very painful. It hurt.
І декілька разів ногами мене.
And on top of that, he kept me with his feet several times.
Я після цього весь час, коли я була там на ізоляції, я знала, що не можу жодної секунди раніше не сісти, прилечь.
And for the remaining of my time at the Ilyich prison, I knew that I was not supposed to get into my bed or sit down on it or lie down on it, not a second before the prescribed time.
Там постійно було чути крики, як катують людей.
I constantly heard people screaming with pain because they were being tortured. I heard it constantly.
Я дуже боялася, що я почую голос свого чоловіка або рідних.
And I was so afraid that I could hear or might hear voices of either my husband or my relatives.
Я дуже боялася і думала, що мені робити, якщо мене почнуть зараз катувати, як мене вмерти скоріше.
And I also was very afraid and frightened what I was going to do if they start torturing me, how I could make sure that I could die quicker and not to go through that.
Мене десь через місяць приїхали оперативні, так звані працівники, котрі мене затримували.
A month later, the operatives who detained me, arrested me, arrived back there.
Мене повели на другий поверх в мішку, в кайданках, поволокли на допит.
And then they grabbed me and basically hold me with my bag on my head, hold me upstairs to the second floor for an interrogation.
А там на другому поверху жили ополченці, котрі воювали проти України.
The second floor was occupied by the combatants who were fighting Ukraine.
І ми чули, коли вони приїжджали з бойових, як гриміла та техніка за вікном.
Every time they would arrive there from the front line, we could hear the vehicles rumbling around there.
І вони потім п'яні, якісь бійки там чинили.
And we also heard how they, having gotten drunk, how they were fighting among themselves.
І ці опери сказали мені, що вони на другому поверсі. Це
Well,
був допит.
These operatives told me that the interrogation was going to take place on the second floor.
Вони сказали, що мене звинувачують в екстремізмі.
They told me as well that I was accused of extremism.
Я запитала, за що?
And I asked them, what for?
Вони сказали, що є доноси на вас,
They said they received reports about you,
що ви привіталися українською мовою,
that they were informed that you were greeting others in Ukrainian,
тому що ви маєте дописи в Фейсбуці українською мовою.
and also it's for you posting on the Facebook in Ukrainian language,
І тому що ви маєте проукраїнську позицію.
and for your pro-Ukrainian stance.
Я сказала,
Opposition.
я ж не скривала цього.
I told them, look, I did not try to hide it.
І це мої думки, тобто ви мене звинувачуєте за те, що як я думаю.
So these are my thoughts, opinions. So you're basically accusing me for my thoughts, for my opinions.
Вони сказали, що зараз війна,
What they said was, in response, they said, now it's wartime.
і те, як я думаю, то є злочин.
And we believe it's a crime.
А щоб я так не думала більше, щоб в мене не було дурних думок в голові, і мій рот був чимось зайнят, то як тільки прийдуть хлопці з позиції, то я буду їх давати їм якісь там послуги сексуального характеру.
And they said, so to prevent you from having stupid thoughts and to make sure that your mouth is busy with something, when these combatants come back from the front line, you will be tasked with providing sexual services to these combatants.
Це було дійсно страшно, і я прислухалася, щоб вони не приїжджали.
And that was horrifying. I was listening intently to hear that they're not coming.
Це пройшов вже місяць, як там була, але в мене не було доступу нікого. Я не знала, як передати якісь там про себе, чи узнати, що з моїми рідними. До мене ніхто не приходив.
I spent a month there, and the entire month I had no access to any communication with my relatives. Nobody was allowed to visit me. I didn't know what was happening.
І десь через місяць мене повезли також в кайданках і в мішку до слідчого.
About in a month, they handcuffed me, put a bag on my head, and brought me to an investigator.
І він мені сказав, що мої рідні мені найняли адвоката.
He told me that my relatives hired a lawyer for me, retained a lawyer for me.
Це мене не дало радості, а налякало.
That actually didn't give me joy, but rather frightened me.
Тому що дівчата розповідали в ізоляції, що треба мати адвоката того, котрий має допуск до МГБ, свого для МГБ.
Because the girls at Ilyich prison told me that you were supposed to have the lawyer who would have access and to the ministry, so-called Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk, so-called Donetsk People's Republic. So it should be their lawyer, quote unquote.
І щоб людина відмовилася від цього, дівчат б'ють.
And in order for the girls to refuse to accept the lawyer that their relatives would retain, they simply beat them to extort that refusal.
Але мій адвокат, котрого наняли мої рідні, він мав доступ до МГБ.
But the lawyer that my relatives retained for me had access, had some kind of connection into the so-called Ministry of State Security of the so-called DNR.
Мені дали з ним поговорити, і єдине, що він мені сказав, що вас бити там не будуть більше. Я домовився.
And I managed to speak with him, and the only thing he told me was, look, I arranged for you not to be beaten anymore.
Але він нічого не може зробити для мого звільнення.
But he told me he could not do anything for my liberation, for freeing me.
І він радить погоджуватися зі всіма обвиненнями, котрі мені надають.
And he advised me to agree with all the accusations that would be levied against me.
І це прискорить закінчення мого діла і передачу його в суд.
That would expedite the investigation of my case and transfer it to the trial, to the courts for
Єдине,
trial.
що ця людина для мене зробила, і я йому дійсно за це вдячна, що він домовився, щоб мене перевели з ізоляції в Донецьку СІЗО, в другу тюрму.
The only thing that I'm really grateful to this lawyer for, and that's important that he did it for me, he managed to arrange a transfer for me from the Ilyich prison to the Donetsk prisoner detention center.
І хоч я там була в камері серед злочинців, кримінальних жінок, від нас там було 20 людей, і там не було покою і тиші жодної хвилини. 20. Але це було краще, ніж в тій ізоляції.
And although I was placed into a cell with 20 other women, most of them criminals there, but it was still better than at Ilyich prison.
За 3 роки, котрі я провела там, я бачила адвоката разів 5.
Over the 3 years that I spent there, I got to see my lawyer roughly 5 times.
За ті роки, котрі я там провела, я бачила слідчого разів 6.
Over the time of the years I spent there, I saw the investigator of my case about 6 times.
За ті 3 роки, котрі я там провела, мені було відмовлено в побаченні з рідними. Жодного разу я не мала такого побачення.
Over the 3 years that I spent there at that detention center, I was not given a single chance to see my relatives, to receive visitors, not at all.
Я була в камері, де були жінки хворі на СПІД, на туберкульоз, на сифіліс.
I was held in a cell together with other women who were infected with HIV, TB, and syphilis.
Я була в камері, де у нас таргани і клопи просто гуляли по нашим тілам.
I was held in a cell where cockroaches and bugs were literally having a parade on walking all over our bodies.
І ми знімали їх будь-який час доби, і не можна було нічого з цим робити. З тіла.
And during any time of the day, we were trying to remove them from our body, but it was not possible to get rid of all of them.
Ми не мали належного медичного огляду, бо там була одна лікарка, котра не мала ніяких ліків.
We had no proper health care or examination because there was just one doctor there who had no proper medication.
Ми не мали питної води.
We had no potable water.
Ми не мали права на належний захист.
We had no rights for the defense that we were entitled to.
Мені дуже повезло в житті, бо я мала той обмін, в котрий попала.
And I was very lucky in my life, I would say, because I was part of the prisoner swap that I ended up being part of.
Я повернусь зараз до тих жінок, котрі залишилися.
But I'd like to get back to those women who stayed behind.
Бо я пообіцяла, що я про них буду пам'ятати і буду використовувати будь-яку можливість про них розповідати.
Because I promised them that I would remember them and I would use any opportunity to talk about them.
Я хочу, щоб ви почули ім'я Оля Мілещенко.
I would like you to hear this name.
І якщо у вас буде Мілещенко.
Ola Myleshchenko.
І якщо у вас буде можливість впливу або донести цю інформацію будь-до кого.
And if you would have a chance to, of some kind of influence or to convey this information to anyone who could make a difference,
Розповідайте, будь ласка, про те, що Оля Малещенко вже 3 роки знаходиться в Донецькому СІЗО.
please do tell everybody that for 3 years now, Ola Mileshchenko is being held at Donetsk Prisoner Detention Center.
3 роки тому її забрали за дописи в Твіттері. Вона просто лайкала.
3 years ago, she was grabbed and arrested for simply liking Twitter posts.
Коли її забирали, її молодшому сину було 4 роки. 4 роки.
When they grabbed her, when they arrested her, her youngest son was just 4 years old.
Дитині сказали, що мама поїхала на заробітки.
And that child was told that his mom left
І вже 3 роки.
for working somewhere else.
І вже 3 роки дитина питається, чого вона не дзвонить, чого вона нас кинула.
The child was told that his mom went to earn some money somewhere else, and for the last 3 years, this kid keeps asking this question: why is mom not calling me? Why she's not letting me know how things are?
І ця дитина збирає гроші, котрі йому дарують на Різдво, на день народження, збирають гроші, ці копійки на квиток для мами.
And this kid, over the last 3 years, has been collecting and saving all the money, all these pennies and cents that he was given for Christmas and other occasions. He is saving them all for his mom's return ticket.
Звісно, ви маєте собі уявити, як їй тяжко.
One can only imagine. You can only imagine how hard it is for her.
Я вас дуже прошу, якщо є у вас така можливість, давайте їй подаруємо той шанс на волю.
And I please appeal to you, if there's a chance, the slightest chance to do it, let's give her a chance for freedom.
І той шанс подаруйте іншим жінкам і чоловікам цивільним, котрі роками там утримуються.
As well as give the same chance to other civilian men and women who are held there for years now.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much. That was moving and difficult to hear, but also I think important for all of us to hear. Rather than take questions now, I think maybe we'll go to our final panelist, and then we can have questions afterwards. Anna Olsen is a senior combat medic of the Chemical and Biological Protection Company of the 36th Separate Brigade of the Marines in Ukraine. She, along with her siblings and stepsisters, was at the Ilyich factory in Mariupol. She was captured and spent 6 months in captivity at Olenivka, undergoing physical and psychological torture. She was held with 36 others in a cell designed for just 6 individuals. And I'll turn it over to Anna to explain more. Thank you.
Вітаю вас. По-перше, я хочу подякувати вам за те, що ви прийшли сьогодні сюди, за те, що ви цікавитеся цією важкою темою на даний час для моєї країни, і подякувати за вашу цікавість, за те, що ви хочете знати правду, а не лише те, що можна знайти в інтернеті.
Well, first and foremost, good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for being here, for coming here, to learn more about this important matter, about important subject, and I would like to thank you for showing a genuine interest to find out what's really happening in my country rather than what you can grab off the internet.
На той час, коли весь цивілізований світ бореться із насиллям, із расизмом, Росія його приймає і вважає, що так воно і має бути.
While the entire civilized world is fighting violence, is fighting racism, Russia fully adopted it and made it its own and believes that's the way it should be.
Для них приймати насилля на тих, хто слабший, то є нормально, то є норма.
It is normal. It's okay for them to accept violence, to apply violence against those who are weaker.
Моя бригада разом зі мною були перші, хто прийняли бої на території Маріуполя, і ті, хто майже до останнього патрону і останнього солдату стояли на заводі.
My brigade were the first who got engaged in defending Mariupol, in fighting the Russians to defend Mariupol, who were defending it to the last cartridge, to the last ammo, and to the last soldier standing.
Коли нас було захоплено в полон, нам не могли пояснити, за що саме нас ненавидять. З те, що ми говоримо українською мовою, з те, що ми є українські військовослужбовці, або просто за те, що ми є.
When we were captured, they couldn't really explain to us clearly why they hated us, whether that was because we spoke Ukrainian or because we were members of the Ukrainian armed forces, or maybe simply because for the very simple fact of us being us.
На той час, коли я знаходилася в полоні, Росія не дотримувалася ніяких міжнародних прав, не хотіла дотримуватися Женевської конвенції і елементарно не хотіла надавати якісь мінімальні потреби для того, щоб вижити або жити там.
When we were in captivity, Russia failed to stick to the Geneva Convention requirements whatsoever. They were not giving us the minimum requirement, they were not fulfilling the minimum requirements as per the convention to give us a chance not only to live as it was required, but also at least to survive.
Я говорю про відсутність медичної якоїсь допомоги взагалі, якісь індивідуальні гігієнічні засоби, що для жінок, що для чоловіків, вони також були відсутні.
What I'm talking about here is a total lack of any medical care or health assistance or health care at all, or individual hygiene products that are important, especially for women, but also for men.
Повна ізоляція від інформації про те, що відбувається в світі, лише їхні новини, де розповідалось про те, що Росія вже перемогла майже весь світ, і Америка вже їй допомагає також, тому що зрозуміла, що Америка не може без Росії.
We were in a full and complete isolation in terms of information. We were not given anything but the news that were spread by the Russian information channels, which basically went something like Russia has already won in the entire world, and the US already on side because the US realized that they could not do anything without Russia.
Розумієте, знаходячись там, один день для тебе є як рік.
You should understand one thing. One day there feels like the entire year.
Росія не дотримується Женевських конвенцій, тому я буду говорити за неодноразове фізичне або сексуальне насилля. Я буду говорити за те, що це є системою, яка є кожного дня.
Russia does not adhere to the Geneva Conventions. And so when I'm going to talk about what happened, physical and sexual violence, they are not one-off or maybe two times off. They are systemic, happening on a systemic basis.
Коли на так звані допити мене забирали представники російських спеціальних служб або російські військові, на запитання, за що саме, була лише одна відповідь: за те, що ви українці, за те, що ви не хочете назад в Радянський Союз, і просто за те, що ми так хочемо.
Every time I was taken to a so-called interrogation by the Russian security services or by the Russian military personnel, when I would ask them, what for? The answer was, because you are Ukrainians, because you don't want to be back in the USSR, and simply because we feel like it, we want to.
Для них немає різниці: ти жінка, ти чоловік, ти військовий або ти цивільний.
They don't differentiate. It doesn't matter to them whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're a military personnel or a civilian.
Для них ти ворог, якого треба знищити всіма доступними засобами на даний час.
For them, you're an enemy that should be extinguished by all means available to them at that point in time.
Під фізичним насиллям я розумію не лише пряме значення цього слова, не лише драки, а й побиття всіма можливими підручними засобами, які знаходяться в кімнаті або в місці, де ви є.
When I say physical violence, I don't only mean beating up. I mean violence and violent beating with all tools or instruments or whatever objects would be found in the room at that time.
Якщо російським військовим здається, що тобі недостатньо боляче, вони переходять до більш грубшої форми і переходять до тортур.
If the Russian militaries feel that it's not painful enough for you, then they move on or move the notch up to a more violent form of impact or violent form of trying to beat you up or to outright torture.
Я говорю не лише за побиття електричним струмом, який на час знаходження в полоні для тебе вже є звичним, як побажати своїм друзям гарного ранку. Ну, як поздоровкати.
Okay. I'm not even talking here about a regular torture with the electric current, which becomes almost as routine as saying good morning to your friends.
Я говорю про тортури, які є просто верхом жорстокості на даний час. Це намагання тебе повісити.
What I'm talking about here is the utter cruelty in torturing, such as imitating or attempting to hang you,
Спалити тебе в пічки для дрів,
or attempting to burn you alive in a wood stove,
або лякати тим, що тебе застрелять, того, що ззаді тебе стоять їхні спецслужби з зарядженим автоматом, які знаходяться коло твоєї голови весь час.
or simply saying that they were going to shoot you right now because one of the Secret Services operative was standing right behind you with the barrel of the machine gun firmly pressed against the back of your head.
Для них немає різниці, чоловік це чи жінка, коли ми говоримо за сексуальне насилля, тому що це є дуже велика різниця, сексуальне насилля для жінок і для чоловіків.
They do not differentiate between either you're a man or a woman when we're talking about sexual violence, because it's a big difference when it comes to sexual violence against women and men.
Знаходячись в деяких територіях Росії, ми чули своїми вухами про те, як хлопців гвалтували.
While we were kept in various locations in Russia, we actually heard clearly how guys were raped.
З приводу жінок, там, де я знаходилася, слава Богу, до гвалтування не дійшло, але мене за 6 місяців роздягали 12 разів.
Thank goodness, in those places, on locations where I was held, it did not come to raping women, but over the 6 months that I was there, they undressed me 12 times.
Ти відчуваєш себе шматком м'яса, якого роздивляються, якого торкаються і якому погрожують. І ти розумієш, що ти нічого з цим зробити не можеш, того, що їх 5, а ти один.
They make you feel like a piece of meat that they touch, that they threaten you, and you are painfully aware you can do absolutely nothing with this.
Розповідаючи це все, я хочу, щоб ви зрозуміли і донесли до ваших друзів, до ваших колег про те, що Росія є вірусом, який погрожує всьому світу, всьому цивілізованому світу, яка не хоче розвиватися і підтягуватися до нормальних норм життя, до нормального відношення до своїх або навіть не своїх громадян.
I'm telling you all this so that you could share it with your friends, with your colleagues, that Russia is a virus in this world, a virus threatening the entire civilized world that does not want to develop, improve itself, does not want to come closer to the norms of normal life and living, not only for the foreigners, but also for its own citizens.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all four of you for your words and thoughts, and difficult as they are for all of us to hear. At this point, we have a little bit of time for some questions, maybe about 10 or 15 minutes. And if I may, I'd like to begin with a question for both Lyudmila and Anna, which is not a question about politics, although that's my home base. I'm a political scientist, but a human one, which is, where did you find the resilience to survive from one day to the next? What was it that allowed you to not give up? Because it's so horrific to hear, and for me, so unimaginable. I can't imagine myself being in that position. I could only imagine giving up if I were. So I wonder from each of you, if you could just talk about what kept you going and what helped you survive.
Я зараз, дивлячись назад, я чесно, я не знаю.
You know what? Looking back, honestly, I don't know.
Там ціль одна – прожити цей день.
There, the objective was to make it through that day, one day.
Я знаю, скільки зусиль робили мої рідні. Це я знала через слова адвоката.
I know how much efforts my relatives were putting into trying to help me. I learned it from my lawyer about it.
Я знала, скільки зусиль вони робили, скільки зусиль робили мої друзі.
I knew how many efforts my friends undertook.
І єдине, про що я думала, я не можу їх підвести.
And the only thought that I had in my head that was, I cannot let them down.
На волі в той час народилася моя внучата племянниця, дитина.
While I was imprisoned or in detention, my niece, my sort of granddaughter's niece was born.
Я дуже хотіла її побачити.
My niece on the granddaughter's kind of line. I wanted to see her very much.
І, мабуть, ця підтримка, ці молитви, котрі робили мої рідні.
Perhaps this desire to see them and to see this little baby, and the prayers that were sent my way by my relatives,
Це тримало мене.
was helping me to hold on.
Але перший сон, котрий мені наснився вже на волі, це був сон, начебто я знову стала там в тюрмі, і мене зустрічають і кажуть, не бійся, ти ж все вже знаєш.
But the very first dream I had as a free person when I was freed was actually the dream about me coming back to that prison, and they were meeting me with the word, hey, don't be afraid, you know everything about here now.
Я так кричала, що мій чоловік проснувся і лякався за мене. А я зрозуміла, що більше я не зможу.
When I had that dream, I started screaming. My husband got scared and frightened, and I understood that I wouldn't be able,
Бути там ще раз.
and I realized at that moment I wouldn't make it if I were there, if I were to find myself there again.
Все.
That's it.
З приводу мене, мені здається, мені просто пощастило з тим, що я народилася більш сильнішою в моральному плані.
I think in my case, I think I simply was lucky that I was born with a very strong moral anchor or strong moral center point, so to say.
Та й до того специфіка роботи у спеціальній роті в морській піхоті накладає на тебе відбиток того, що ти маєш пережити все, незважаючи на те, що є вокруг тебе.
And I think another thing was that being part of a Marines special company, special forces company that I was part of, actually impacts what you do and how you operate.
Та й бажання не здаватися слабкою для них та не давати їм оцього присмаку перемоги над собою давало стимул витримати то все і повернутися назад в країну до своєї сім'ї.
Another thing was that there was a wish. I really wanted not to appear weak in front of them. I didn't want to give them the luxury and the pleasure of feeling that they have won, that they have victory over me, and also a very strong desire to get back to where I was and to continue defending my country.
Thank you both.
Definitely.
Yes, Irina.
Yeah, I will ask in Ukrainian to remind that it's very everyone say that. У мене запитання до обох вас, так, тому що ви багато говорили про минуле, та дуже важливо говорити про, напевно, майбутнє і теперішнє. І в мене питання, тому що Таня вже сказала, що 160 жінок було звільнено за цей час. Тобто, чи є якісь програми психологічної, медичної допомоги для жінок, які пройшли ці жахи? Тому що, вочевидь, вона вам потрібна, так? І самим психологічно і фізіологічно здолати все це дуже важко. Я, наприклад, знаю, що в Києві є організація, яка, в принципі, українці, лікарі, які об'єдналися для того, щоб допомагати. Там є жіноча програма, можливо, є сенс якимось чином проговорити, отримати якусь зацікавленість з їхнього боку, щоб надавати саме цю допомогу психологічну і медично жіночу для цих жінок, які пройшли ці жахи.
Well, I just wanted to address, Irina, I just wanted to address this to both speakers. You were talking about the past, but I mean, if we were to talk about the present and the future, you mentioned that you were part of the swap of 160 women, but I think that's very important to talk about the programs of psychological and medical rehabilitation and help to those and for those who actually went through all this ordeal, all this horror. And I know that here at Yale, there's an organization of Ukrainian doctors that sort of set up this program of support and help for women. Perhaps we could somehow link up and apply it to what is required now psychologically and medically and otherwise for those who went through all this.
Я відповім за цивільних жінок, і це трохи різні речі. На жаль, так у нас в державі, що для військових є одна програма реабілітації, для цивільних має бути інша, але закон тільки прийнят, і він, по суті, не працює.
Well, I will talk about the civilian women side of things. We have separate rehabilitation programs and frameworks for the military and for the civilians. So the militaries have been receiving theirs, but the civilian support in this sense the law has just been approved, has been passed, and it's not working.
Але є дуже багато громадських об'єднань, і я їм дуже вдячна. І одне з об'єднань прийняло мене до свого составу. Я з ними зараз працюю. Це Сема Україна, і її очолює Ірина Довгань, котра також була полонена в 2014 році. Над нею дуже знущалися. Вона є герой України.
Як називається організація?
Сема Україна.
Sema Ukraine. And there are a lot of NGOs working in this field, and I'm very grateful to them for that. And one of them took me on board, called Sema Ukraine. And Irina Dobhan, who used to be a prisoner herself, starting in 2014, is the head of this organization. So I'm very grateful for them, to them for that.
Ця організація об'єднує цивільних, саме цивільних жінок, котрі побували в полоні.
That organization brings together civilian women who actually were kept prisoners.
І дуже страшна статистика, бо зараз таких жінок стало більше за те, що раніше це була тільки Донецька і Луганська області, а зараз це є Крим, є Запорізька область, є Херсонська область, і є області, котрі були тимчасово, але під окупацією.
And the statistics there are horrible. There are so many women who became prisoners, who were captured as a result of the invasion and occupation. If earlier it was Donetsk and Luhansk regions only, then we have Crimea. Now it's and other regions have been added. Zaporizhia, Kherson regions and other temporary occupied areas that were liberated since then. So they all saw that.
І ми співпрацюємо з іншими громадськими організаціями, благодійними фондами, котрі мають можливість надавати психологічну, вона безумовно потрібна, це перше, що потрібно, допомогу, і іншу допомогу для жінок, і якщо буде така можливість, бо гінекологічна проблема, це також дуже-дуже важлива для нас, для жінок, самі розумієте, бо роками не отримувати зовсім ніякого догляду в цьому плані, це критично.
And we are, of course, working together with those NGOs and charity organizations that help us a lot. Specifically, we're talking about psychological help, support, and rehabilitation, and all kinds of other support and that we're trying to put in place there, especially for women. It's very important to get the gynecological support that for them, because the gynecology problems that they may have run into after years of neglect, no access to that kind of care, impacted them. So that is very important to have that available to them.
Ми будемо вдячні за будь-яку допомогу, якщо така у вас буде можливість, і якісь пропозиції, і ця допомога потрібна жінкам, котрі пережили страшне в своєму житті.
So we would be grateful if you have an opportunity to help out with this. I would be grateful for that. And any proposals they may put forward in this respect, it would be valuable, very valuable for all these women who went through this horrible experience in their lives. Thank you.
На даний час є програма реабілітації для військовослужбовців та цивільних, які в межах обміну повернулися на територію України.
At this point in time, we do have a rehabilitation program in place, both for the militaries and the civilians who've been returned to Ukraine after their captivity.
Так, вона не є ідеальною, в неї є багато ще моментів, які можна доробити або переробити для того, щоб її покращити.
Yes, it's by no means ideal. There are a lot of areas there that could be either redone or improved.
Але ми маємо розуміти, що найбільша допомога, яку потребують військовополонені, які повернулися з полону, це є саме психологічна допомога, тому що жертви насилля не завжди можуть про це розповідати. Тому якби основний аспект саме допомоги це є саме психологічна допомога. І, звісно, з приводу жінок, так, це найбільше питання – це гінекологія. Але повний комплекс, який на даний час можуть запропонувати нам наші медики, він є максимум того, що можуть дати без допомоги країн-партнерів наші медики з тими аспектами того, що вони працюють не лише з полоненими, а ще й з пораненими військовими на даний час.
Остання думка, я не до кінця зрозумів, що ви маєте на увазі повним комплексом.
Повний комплекс, як обстеження повністю, МРТ, КТ і оце проче, як жінок це гінеколог, для чоловіків.
Маєте на увазі, що українські медики зараз це можуть зробити чи не?
Ні, вони можуть зробити, але потрібна допомога країн-партнерів, тому що вони працюють і з полоненими, і з пораненими також. Один і той же медик.
So, of course, there's a lot of need. There are a lot of needs. There are lots of needs for support. But one has to be clear about one thing. the biggest need for those who were liberated from captivity is a psychological one, psychological support. Of course, it is obvious that many victims of violence may not or cannot or would not be able to talk about it. So psychological support is paramount. Psychological support for women is also very important, and gynecological support, of course, is critical. Our healthcare personnel is capable of providing a full kit or full-scale support for both medical, psychological, and gynecological support, but they do require a backup, a serious support from its international partners.
I think actually, unfortunately, we're out of time. I know we all have more questions and things on our mind. I'm grateful to all of you for having attended this event. And I'm grateful also for those who have tuned in to the live stream version, as well as those who may be watching this recording at a later date. But I'm especially grateful for our panelists. I did not mention earlier that they've traveled, obviously they've traveled from Ukraine. What's not obvious is that they traveled from Ukraine yesterday. So my first order of business when this is done is to get them coffee. But they do also have another appointment on campus. So I'd like to invite you all to join me in a round of applause.
Додати, що у нас є наше дослідження, яке ми підготували про жінок в полоні. Якщо комусь цікаво, ми можемо також його.
I would also like to add and share with you the following. We have a report on females in captivity or in female prisoners, and we would be happy to share that with you.
Також там є кілька екземплярів про нашого іншого дослідження про окуповані і звільнені території Херсонської області.
And there are a couple of items there about the occupied and liberated area of the Kherson region.
Я хотіла би вам передати від Національної спілки журналістів України ось ці екземпляри газет. Це перші номери, котрі на деокупованій вже території були зроблені за підтримкою Національної спілки і міжнародних організацій, бо там немає іншої інформації, крім цих газет.
And I would like to give you a brochure and the newspapers put together by the Ukrainian Union of Journalists. These were the very first newspapers that were printed and published and printed on the deoccupied territories of Ukraine, because they have no other sources to access information other than these newspapers that were put together by the Ukrainian Union of Journalists.
Якщо можна запропонувати, тому що Андрій ще сказав, що якщо можна, не розбирайте всі ці примірники, тому що є пропозиція просто продати їх в бібліотеку Єлю, наприклад, бо це реально унікальні речі, і це багато більше історичної ваги для студентів, які будуть розглядати. Так що якщо можна, кілька примірників залишити.
Yeah, request put forward now is please, if you could not take away all of them, so if we could leave them some in EL for students to peruse, and just actually it's very valuable for them to know that.
Я перепрошую, я можу вам передати через пані Ірину ще такий набір, і то буде набір з підписом Ліни Кущ, вона є секретар спілки журналістів України.
I mean, I'm sorry, I could also, through Irina, I could pass on another copy, more copies of that, signed by Lina Kush, the chairwoman of the Union of Journalists of Ukraine.
And I'll remind everyone, I think my email address is relatively easy to remember, david.simon@yale.edu. If you have follow-up questions or wish to reach the panelists or the other organizers, I'd be happy to play that role of intermediary.
Так, я зі свого боку, і ми, як медійна ініціатива, дуже за права людини хотіли би дуже подякувати організаторам, Девіду, за те, що відбулася ця панель, ця дискусія, і ми змогли представити і наше дослідження, і взагалі розказати про те, що відбувається в Україні. Для нас важлива така підтримка і розуміння того, що є розуміння, що відбувається.
On behalf of the Media Initiative for Human Rights, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to David and his colleagues who've managed to, who helped us organize this panel discussion, which was very important for everyone to learn what's happening in Ukraine. It's extremely important. So thank you very much, David.